I'll never forget the day everything shifted. I was 25, fresh out of college, and still trying to figure out my path in life. One afternoon, I overheard my dad on the phone. His voice was tense. No, absolutely not. You're not taking over my company. I've worked too hard for this, he said. I shouldn't have listened in, but I couldn't help it. My stomach twisted with worry. Dad's business was in trouble, and I had no idea. Why hadn't he told us? That night at dinner, I watched him closely. On the surface, he seemed fine, joking with Mom about her slightly overcooked pot roast. But I noticed the faint lines of stress around his eyes and how his smile didn't fully reach them. I wanted to help, but I didn't know the first thing about business. Still, I couldn't just sit by and watch everything crumble. The next day, I started digging. It didn't take long to find out who was behind it. A big-time businessman named Colton Caldwell was trying to take over Dad's company. His office wasn't far from our house, so I decided to go there. The receptionist looked at me like I'd lost my mind when I asked to see Mr. Caldwell. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "No, but it's really important. Just 5 minutes, please," I begged. I must have looked desperate enough because, after a quick phone call, she waved me toward the elevator. "Top floor," she said, and the ride-up felt like it took forever. When the doors opened, I found myself face-to-face with Colton Caldwell. He was older than I expected, with silver hair and sharp eyes that took me in with a single glance. Well, he said, giving me a once-over. "What do we have here?" I swallowed hard. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Savannah Thompson. I'm here about my father's company, Thompson Windows." His eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Thompson's daughter? This is unexpected. Come in, let's talk." I followed him into his office, trying not to be distracted by the stunning view from his window. He sat behind a massive desk and gestured for me to sit. "So, Miss Thompson, what can I do for you?" I took a deep breath and said, "Please don't take over my father's company. It means everything to him. There has to be another way." Caldwell leaned back in his chair, studying me closely. "Interesting. I have a proposition for you, Miss Thompson. I'll leave your father's company alone if you agree to marry my son." I blinked, sure I had misunderstood him. "Excuse me? You heard me. Marry my son. It will help him grow up a little. Do that and your father's business will be safe." I left his office in a daze. Marry his son? Was he out of his mind? But as I thought about it, I realized I didn't have much of a choice. It was either this or watch my dad's entire life's work fall apart. The next day, I found myself back in that intimidating office. Caldwell was waiting, looking smug. "So, Miss Thompson, have you made up your mind?" he asked. I took another deep breath. "Yes, I'll do it. I'll marry your son." Caldwell clapped his hands together, pleased. "Excellent. Let's introduce you to him, shall we?" Before I knew it, I was being led into another room, and there he was, Caldwell's son. I had expected some uptight businessman, but the man standing in front of me was far from it. He was tall, with messy dark hair and a lopsided grin. "Hey," he said, offering his hand. "I'm Grayson. You must be Savannah Thompson." I shook his hand, trying to hide my surprise. "Yeah, that's me." Grayson's father cleared his throat. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted." As soon as the door closed behind him, Grayson's casual attitude shifted. He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. "Look, I'm really sorry about this. My dad, he's a bit old-fashioned," Grayson said, clearly embarrassed. I shrugged, trying to seem laid back. "It's fine. We're both adults, right? We can handle this." Grayson laughed, but it sounded a little forced. "Yeah, sure. Just a casual arranged marriage, no big deal." We spent the next hour talking, and to my surprise, Grayson wasn't so bad. He was actually pretty smart and funny, even if he seemed a bit reckless. I could see why his father wanted him to grow up. Over the next few weeks, Grayson and I started going out, if you could even call it dating. We went to dinners, caught a few movies, the usual stuff. But there was always this underlying awkwardness. We both knew this wasn't real, no matter how much we pretended. 6 months later, I found myself walking down the aisle. My dad looked so proud, so happy, completely unaware of the deal I'd made to save his business. As I said my vows, I looked into Grayson's eyes. There wasn't any real love between us, but there was a friendship growing. Maybe that would be enough. The reception was a blur of congratulations and champagne. At one point, Grayson's mother, Vivian, cornered me. Her smile was tight. "Welcome to the family, dear," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I do hope you'll make Grayson happy." I forced a smile. "I'll do my best, Mrs. Caldwell." As I glanced around during the reception, I caught sight of my father-in-law. He was grinning, clearly satisfied with himself, and a surge of anger bubbled up inside me. To him, this was all just a well-played game. The first few years of my marriage to Grayson were, well, interesting. We quickly fell into a routine. We lived in a beautiful house, courtesy of Grayson's father's wealth, but it felt more like we were two roommates sharing a space rather than a married couple. I tried to be a positive influence on Grayson, and gradually I started seeing small changes in him. He began distancing himself from his wild, party-loving friends and spending more time in the office, working alongside his father. It was clear how proud his father was when Grayson started showing a genuine interest in the family business. Seeing that pride in his father's eyes made me feel like this whole unusual arrangement wasn't completely meaningless. But Grayson's mother, Vivian, was a different story. She never outright criticized me, but her disapproval was obvious. It was in the way she pursed her lips whenever I spoke or the subtle, backhanded compliments she'd throw my way. "Oh, Savannah Thompson, that dress is interesting. So bold of you to wear something like that." I would just grit my teeth and smile politely, forcing a "thank you, Mrs. Caldwell," through my clenched jaw. Even with the tension, I held on to the hope that Grayson and I could eventually grow to love each other. Maybe once we had kids, things would shift, and we'd become a real family. But life had other plans. On a crisp fall afternoon, Grayson and I sat side by side in the doctor's office, an uncomfortable silence hanging between us. The doctor cleared his throat, his voice soft but serious. "I'm sorry," he began. "The tests show that, Mr. Caldwell, you are unable to father children." The news hit me like a punch to the gut. No children. The one thing I thought could help bring Grayson and me closer, the hope of starting a family and making this marriage real, was now out of reach. That night, as I lay awake, I couldn't help but think about my own parents. My dad's business had thrived since my marriage to Grayson. In fact, he'd managed to double his revenue. I was genuinely happy for him, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being adrift. I wanted something more for myself. I wanted to work, to have a purpose beyond just being Grayson's wife. When I brought up the idea of working to Grayson, his reaction was immediate and firm. "Work? Why would you need to work? We have more than enough money." "It's not about the money, Grayson," I explained. "I just want to do something that feels meaningful." He shook his head. "In our circle, wives don't work. They get involved in charity. Why don't you start a foundation or something?" And that's how the Savannah Thompson Caldwell Foundation for Children with Cancer came to be. It wasn't exactly what I'd envisioned for myself, but it gave me a sense of purpose. I threw myself into the work, organizing fundraisers, visiting hospitals, and doing whatever I could to make a difference. Grayson, on the other hand, didn't seem to care much about my new endeavor. In fact, he didn't seem to care about anything I did anymore. We were living in the same house, but our lives had become separate, rarely crossing paths. The years passed, 10 to be exact, and then everything changed again. Grayson's father died suddenly from a heart attack. Just like that, Grayson was thrust into the role of CEO. I tried my best to support him, but I could see the strain of his new responsibilities weighing heavily on him. 2 years later, we received more devastating news. Grayson's mother was diagnosed with cancer. Grayson, ever pragmatic, suggested, "We should move her to a care facility. They'll be able to look after her better than we can." But his mother was as stubborn as ever. "I will die in my own home," she declared, her chin lifted in defiance. So, with my experience from the Cancer Foundation, I took charge of her care. I hired nurses, managed her treatments, and spent hours by her side. Surprisingly, Vivian's attitude toward me began to shift. One day, as I was adjusting her pillows, she reached out and grabbed my hand. "You're a good woman, Savannah Thompson," she said softly. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell," I whispered, touched by her unexpected kindness. 5 years passed since Grayson took over the company, and I wish I could say things got better. But the truth is they didn't. Grayson's behavior started to spiral. He was drinking more, coming home at odd hours, and snapping at me over the smallest things. I felt like I was losing him little by little. One day, I received a call from Grayson's assistant one afternoon. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm sorry to bother you, but Mr. Caldwell hasn't been to the office in days." "Is everything okay?" she asked. That night, when Grayson finally stumbled home, reeking of alcohol, I confronted him. "Grayson, what's going on? Your assistant called, and you haven't been to work." He let out a bitter laugh. "Work? What's the point? The company's going under anyway." Dear old Dad left me a sinking ship, and I couldn't keep it afloat. I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Years of hard work, gone. And Grayson sounded almost relieved. Desperate to save what was left, I reached out to my father. Even though he was semi-retired, he agreed to step in and help. He offered Grayson a position as his deputy, hoping to mentor him back to success. But Grayson's heart just wasn't in it. He showed up late, left early, and barely put in any effort. I watched in frustration as my father's business started to suffer. Sales began to drop, and I knew I had to confront Grayson. One night, after he had a few drinks, I decided it was time to talk. "Grayson, we need to discuss work. You're barely showing up, and my father's company is paying the price because of you." His face twisted with anger. "Oh, so it's my fault now? I never wanted any of this, Jules. None of it." "What are you talking about?" I asked, confused. He laughed again, this time with a cold, harsh edge. "This life, this marriage. I'm just waiting for Mom to die so I can sell her house and get out of here." I stared at him, horrified. "How can you say that? Your mother is dying, and all you care about is her money?" "Don't act all high and mighty," he spat. "We both know this marriage is a sham. You're just as eager to get out as I am." Disgusted, I turned to leave the room. As I opened the door, I came face to face with Grayson's mother. The look on her face said it all. She had heard every word. For a moment, we just stood there in silence. Then, without saying a word, she reached out and gently squeezed my hand. In that brief moment, I felt her gratitude, her understanding, and her sorrow all at once. Then came the day that shattered my world. I got a call about my parents' plane crash. Mom and Dad gone in an instant. Their small plane, headed to Hawaii for a second honeymoon, became their final trip. I was devastated. I needed anyone to lean on, but Grayson was nowhere to be found. He didn't even show up for the funeral. As I stood at the cemetery, watching my parents' caskets lowered into the ground, I had never felt so alone in my life. After the funeral, my grief began to turn into anger. How could he abandon me when I needed him the most? Fueled by that anger, I stormed into my father's company. Our company now, I supposed. The sight that greeted me when I entered my dad's old office made my blood boil. Grayson was lounging in Dad's chair like he owned the place, barking orders like he was some kind of king. "Grayson," I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk." He looked up, his expression one of annoyance. "What is it now, Jules? Can't you see I'm busy?" "Busy?" I snapped. "You couldn't even be busy enough to come to my parents' funeral." Grayson rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go with the guilt trip again. You know what, Jules? You're always nagging, always pushing. Well, I'm done with it. And I'm done with you." I stood there, shocked. Then I saw his expression change. A cold, calculated look replaced the anger in his eyes. "You know, Jules," he said, his tone suddenly calm, "this company is worth around $34 million. And guess what? As deputy director, it's all mine now." My heart sank. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice shaking. He leaned back in Dad's chair, a smug grin spreading across his face. "I have all the passwords, access to all the accounts. I'm in charge now, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't do this, I said, trying to keep my composure. You've already ruined your father's company. I won't let you do the same to my father's legacy. Grayson just laughed, a cold, heartless sound. Oh, I'm not going to run it. I'm going to sell it, piece by piece, and then I'm going to live like a king. Before I could stop him, he turned to the computer and, right in front of me, transferred a large sum of money from the company's account to his personal one. He spun back around to face me, satisfied. There, he said. That should keep me comfortable for a while. Then, as if the whole situation was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a stack of papers. He tossed them in my direction casually. Oh, and here, divorce papers. I think it's time we ended this charade, don't you? I caught the papers, barely able to process what was happening. My mind was spinning. It was all too much. My parents were gone. My marriage was falling apart, and now my father's company was being stolen right in front of me. I walked out of the office in a daze, clutching the divorce papers in my hand. But as I made my way down the hall, something inside me changed. I had spent years bending to Grayson's will, falling victim to his father's manipulations. But no more. It was time to fight back. With a newfound determination, I headed straight to my father's lawyer's office. Mr. Henderson had been my dad's confidant for years, and if anyone could help me, it was him. Savannah Thompson, Mr. Henderson said, standing up to greet me as I entered his office. I'm so sorry about your parents. How are you holding up? I collapsed into the chair across from him, the events of the day pouring out in a rush. Mr. Henderson listened carefully, his expression growing darker with every word. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I was swimming laps when I felt a deep sense of pride wash over me. The company's performance had started to turn around, and I knew my dad would have been proud. Through everything, I never let go of my commitment to the Cancer Foundation. If anything, my work there became even more vital to me. It was a connection to my past and a guiding light for my future. As time went on, Vivian's condition worsened, and I became more involved in her care. I was determined to make her final days as comfortable as possible. Over those 2 years, something unexpected happened. We grew close. Old wounds began to heal, and a bond formed that I never thought could exist. On the day she passed, I was by her side, holding her hand. I whispered, "Thank you for everything, Vivian." She gave my hand a weak squeeze, her face softening into a small smile before she peacefully slipped away. I took it upon myself to organize her funeral, wanting to make sure everything was exactly as it should be. Grayson didn't bother to show up, and although it wasn't surprising, it still stung to realize how far he had fallen. A few weeks after the funeral, I received a call from Mr. Henderson. "Savannah Thompson, there's something you need to see. Can you come by my office?" When I arrived, I was shocked to see Grayson already there, a young blonde woman clinging to his arm.
He smirked at me.
"Well, if it isn't the little CEO. Don't worry, I'm just here to collect my inheritance. Mom and I didn't always see eye to eye, but in the end, blood is thicker than water, right?" I bit my tongue, choosing to wait for Mr. Henderson to speak. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to read Vivian's will. As the words filled the room, I watched Grayson's smug smile fade, first into disbelief, then pure rage. "And so, I leave my house and all my savings to Savannah Thompson, with the stipulation that the funds be donated to the Cancer Foundation she so passionately supports." Tears welled up in my eyes. Vivian's final act of kindness took my breath away. She had given me more than just material wealth. She had offered her support and recognition, validating the woman I had become. Grayson, on the other hand, exploded in a fit of anger. "This is outrageous. She manipulated Mom. She's a fraud, a gold digger. She's ruined my life, and now she's stealing my inheritance." His girlfriend, looking stunned, slowly backed away from him. "You told me we'd be set for life with this money. I'm out of here," she said, before storming out of the room, leaving Grayson sputtering and red-faced. As I walked out of the office, Grayson's angry rants faded into the background. I felt lighter, free. Vivian's gift wasn't just about the money. It was about the trust and recognition she had bestowed upon me. She had truly seen me for who I was and found me worthy.